Let me introduce, I don't need to introduce really Professor Narain to the participants, because Professor Narain is already known to, I think, all of us. She is a professor of St. Stephen's College. This is just for formality. This is a professor of mathematics. She is a professor of mathematics at St. Stephen's College of the University of Delhi, and she has served as the president of the Delhi University Teachers Association for 2 consecutive terms. And she has also spearheaded the Federation of Central University Teachers Association, that is FEDCUTA, as its president. And the most important part of it, I'm not going into the achievements and papers published by her. Those are available on the internet. Now, Professor Narain is known for her, what should I say, ma'am, activism. Whenever the rights of teachers and the common people have been suppressed, voices of dissent have been suppressed by the state powers, she has always been there to protest against all forms of injustices, undemocratic practices, and state atrocities, state-sponsored atrocities. We have seen that over last few, not years, but decades. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation and giving your consent to make the valedictory address in our webinar. Thank you once again, ma'am. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much, and for all the kind words. And I must say that I'm not a very scholarly person. I'm a very devoted teacher. That's true. But I don't deserve much praise for any work of scholarship. Yes, I have been part of the teachers movement, and whenever the need has arisen to take a responsibility, which in an organization one has to do, I have taken that responsibility to the best of my ability. And thank you so much, Professor Das. I know you also through your brilliant son, who has been a student of our college and who is also a Rhodes Scholar, I believe. Thank you for inviting me. I will place my thoughts before all of you. It's not terribly structured, but I will share my...
Just a rectification, just a modest rectification. Yeah. That is Professor Sushnata Das of the Department of History. I'm his younger colleague.
Okay.
No issues. Thank you.
I was under the impression that you are Suchintan's father. So anyway, please congratulate him. And thank you so much for calling me. So I will share my thoughts with all of you. I'd like to start by saying Tripura is burning. These three words have resulted in the draconian UAPA being filed against a social media user who tweeted these three words. Before that, there were two lawyers who had gone on a fact-finding mission and come back and filed a report on the nature of violence in Tripura. UAPA was registered against them. You cannot get bail under UAPA. You don't really need to have a prima facie case. You can fling anyone into jail and you can deny them bail, which is otherwise a fundamental right. So the process itself becomes the punishment. Various judges of various courts have said recently, Justice Foley Nariman, that this has a chilling effect on free speech. Prior to this, we have seen that UAPA has been used indiscriminately against human rights activists, lawyers, scholars. Professor Sudha Bharadwaj. Before that, Dr. G.N. Sai Baba, 90% disabled, wheelchair-bound teacher in Delhi University, outstanding scholar, poet, and a spokesperson for the rights of the most marginalized tribals. Similarly, Professor Sudha Bharadwaj, Professor Anand Teltumle, and the list is endless. We have Professor Hani Babu, and a well-known Jesuit priest, Father Stan Swami, who gave up a life of relative comfort to live among the tribals, to learn about their problems, and to file cases on their behalf through the process of law. He was flung into jail on UAPA charges and he was not given bail, not allowed a straw even to drink water. He had Parkinson's, he developed COVID and he died. This is nothing but institutional murder. And as we all know, it has a chilling effect on free speech and eventually on free thought as well. This is the situation that we are facing today, friends. Let us rewind to 26 November 1949, when we, the people of India, adopted a constitution for ourselves. I carry this like a little talisman in my wallet. Like people carry some little, maybe a little verse of a religious book or something. For me, this is the talisman that I would like to read to myself. And like a lot of other people, it was brought center stage during the anti-CAA movement when the government was trying to bring in laws which were clearly unconstitutional, which were biased against a particular minority community inherently. And there was naturally widespread protest. I won't go into all the details. It was one of the biggest protests, and now it's been superseded by the Kisan, the farmers' protest that we have seen in the whole world. And what does our constitution, which we gave to ourselves, say? We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and of opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual. I want to emphasize that, the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. Liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Where has that gone? You are not allowed to say that there is something going on which is not okay in Tripura. You are arrested under UAPA. Cases of sedition are filed against you. This is what is happening. There are hundreds of examples now. Where the Constitution gave each individual freedom, not only groups, not only communities, but each individual was given the freedom within a group. I have the right to decide how I will live my life, provided I don't impinge on any other person's right. Yes, hate speech is not condoned, but there are people who are indulging in hate speech with impunity, and nothing is being done to them. We all know about that. They're being garlanded. People are lynching other human beings, and they're being rewarded. So what exactly has happened to our country? What exactly has happened to our constitutional values? What has happened to the pillars of democracy which are supposed to protect our democracy? As an individual, I have the right, even within a community, to eat what I want, to dress the way I want to dress, to marry whoever I feel like marrying, to fall in love, to worship in whatever manner I deem fit. There doesn't have to be a homogeneous way in which I worship. Even if I belong to a particular community, my constitution gives me that right. And how did we arrive at this constitution, which is a remarkable, far-sighted piece of legislation for us, better than you would find in most countries. I mean, we arrived at it not only because of a set of very brilliant people with certain insight, which were committed Democrats, but also because there was a diverse struggle in the country before that, which led to the freedom struggle. There were several freedom struggles going on at the same time. We were aspiring for our freedom from political domination. We were also aspiring for our freedom to survive, to live as dignified citizens in our country. So you had freedoms within that freedom that people were struggling for, and all these different sections had come together in the freedom struggle. Of course, there were some which were conspicuously absent, who were actually helping the colonial forces by focusing on the enemy within, apologizing to the British, right? Trying to keep their people away from the freedom struggle, dividing people on the lines of community and caste. So this diversity had led to this constitution being framed, recognizing that our country, particularly our country, having been in the throes for centuries, in the throes of massive inequality of opportunity, inequality of social status, inequality of economic conditions, because of a rigid caste system, because of a history of patriarchy, because of a history of feudalism. And that is why it was so important to have a constitution and also find ways in which the constitution could be made to come alive, to actually become meaningful, to secure to all its citizens these rights, which would not happen on their own without corresponding decisions, policies, empowerment of all its citizens. This is what our founding fathers understood. And why is diversity so important? The greatest strength of our country, in fact, is its diversity. Why is diversity important? Why does it not become a handicap where people will constantly jostle and vie for, compete with each other and, fight amongst each other? Why is it not a problem? Well, diversity, whether you look at nature or you look at genetics, is a strengthening force. Homogeneity is flat like death. It leads to inbreeding, disease, death, annihilation. So diversity is a cherished value. And dissent, an aspect of diversity is dissent. If you have only one view, there's no dissent. Here we're not only talking about two views. We're talking about a multiplication of views, infinity of views. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. And that is what strengthens us, what binds us. We can have differences of opinion, of culture, of lifestyle, but we can come together as human beings. We can care for each other as human beings. So dissent, as I see the Constitution, the way in which it is put, is not just a right, it is also a duty. It is a safeguard against excesses by those in power. And the ability to dissent, the dissent has two parts. The ability to dissent, which means that you can develop your critical abilities, you have the ability to reason, to analyze what you're saying or seeing or what is happening around you. So the ability to dissent and the courage to dissent, that is the second part. Even if you have the ability to dissent, you may not be able to have the courage to dissent. In fact, you can't practice any values unless you have the value of courage. That is the first thing that you need. Also, you need to be empowered in order to be able to dissent. What kind of dissent will be exercised by those struggling for their livelihood, by those carrying night soil on their head, by those denied even the right to have drinking water or exploited in so many different ways? What space will they have to be able to exercise their dissent? So dissent is a value that can be exercised provided you have the space that is created for that dissent to be exercised. And that is why our founding fathers, one, they gave us the pillars of democracy, which are widely recognized as the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and the media, which are supposed to function in a manner which is independent of the powers that be to a large extent, which of course does not happen, as we all know. And it has, over the years, been subverted to an unimaginable extent. We experienced that for a short while during the emergency, but there we knew that there's an emergency. Now, the way in which the Election Commission and the various investigating agencies, the law enforcing agencies, the judiciary and the media, most of all, I would say, have been functioning, leaves our democracy, sort of in tatters, so to say. Every value in the constitution is being violated, is being subverted. And it is not surprising that this is happening, not only because of the history and the record of those who have been able to come to power, but because it is in the nature of power itself. If you and I were in power, we may not always be very different. We see the exercise of power in every aspect of our lives. We see it as teachers. We have to cultivate dissent at every stage. It's a very rare person who can handle power. Jawaharlal Nehru, I mean, you don't always find a Nehru who will say that I will defend to my dying day your right to dissent. I may disagree with you till I die, but I will defend your right to dissent. That is not something that is always forthcoming from those who are invested, who are in power. And the nature of power is such that it tends to perpetuate itself. That is human nature. You seek to make your privilege permanent, a permanent state of affairs. So you obviously don't want dissent. You don't want anyone questioning your policies. There are vested interests. So it is very natural that this would happen. How does it not happen? Well, you have to struggle for justice. You have to struggle for your rights. Without that struggle, you don't get those rights, even if it's written in your constitution. And unfortunately, the way in which things happened in our country, all of us who stepped into the shoes of the British, maybe were not terribly interested in sharing the fruits of power with all our countrymen. And that is why we found that even after so many years, despite the fact that the founding fathers, for example, had recognized education as one of the biggest sources of empowerment for all our citizens. And that is why we had public funded institutions, universities in particular, where you were supposed to be assured of government funding meant funding of the people by the people. Because government revenue is mostly indirect taxation. It comes from indirect taxation mostly, which the poorest of the poor are paying. Whatever you buy in the market, whatever you engage in, I mean, whatever you purchase, you have to pay a sales tax on it. And indirect taxation is the bulk of government revenue. So you owe it to the people to give back to them what is theirs. It doesn't happen. Policies are not made for the benefit of the people, unfortunately. And education in particular began to be subverted soon after independence. One of the reasons being, of course, as I said, that perhaps those of us who stepped into the shoes of the British were not really so keen to share the fruits of power. We knew, for example, that maybe 90% of our people do not have access to education. And some of them because of the place that they were born, their caste. Many of them because of other circumstances, their gender, or the fact that they were in remote tribal areas. We know that, we knew that. How much effort did we make?
Probably
Oh,
Nandita ji has connected. Yes, yes,
my
ma'am. Yes.
net just collapsed.
Yeah, yeah.
I've now got onto my hotspot. So this is, in the digital age, I'm going to come to that soon when we come to the national education
No
policy.
problem. That happens. No
Yeah,
issue. Please go ahead.
institutions do not have connectivity. Anyway, so I was just saying that, how much did we, I mean, maybe we were to blame for not trying enough to implement the policies that were there on paper. As I was explaining to you, in Delhi University, which is one of the premier universities, reservations for teaching posts for the SCST was implemented only in 1996, way after the Mandal Commission report was accepted. And there was this, the political pressure from people belonging to the Bahujan classes that this is our right and we need to have it. And parliamentary standing committees put pressure on vice chancellors again and again, and only then it got implemented. So, and then the OBC reservation, of course, came only in 2008. The Mandal report sat on shelves for years. Nobody had the political will to implement it. So we find the representation of teachers from perhaps 90% of our population, our gene pools, almost missing in our university faculties. So the kind of diversity of thought that we need to bring into through our faculties, that is not happening, right? Can happen. I mean, you need a diversity in the faculty as well, not just in the student population. Otherwise, there's a mismatch, and there can be, without realizing, perhaps there could be discrimination, and sometimes it may happen very deliberately. So, these are ways of denying access to those who have suffered for centuries because of exclusion, right? So this is what was happening in any case. Maybe that those of us who stepped into the shoes of the British thought of ourselves as rulers rather than trustees, and therefore the policies did not get implemented in the same manner as they should get implemented. But apart from that, there was also interference from imperial forces which took on the shape of the World Bank and IMF giving us loans and putting conditions. And in those conditions, they would say, why do you need so many school teachers? They were focusing on school education first. You can manage with para teachers, you can manage with 2 teachers, you can manage with privatized teacher education, and so on. So the degradation started with school education. And you can see what is the state of government schools today, then leading to the idea that why they're not sort of functional, and therefore let us get rid of them, sell them off to the highest bidder. So schools are being sold in thousands, all right? So that is one thing that happened, and then they turned to higher education, saying that higher education is a non-merit good. We have seen it in World Bank documents, do not fund tertiary education, and so on. So we were under attack from both inside and outside, and we found that the East India Company metamorphosed into the World Bank and metamorphosed into the IMF, and then it metamorphosed into the WTO, and through legislation, through treaties like the GATS treaty, they were trying to annex higher education and health in particular. Other things also, agriculture, thereby controlling both the resources and the product in the era of globalization. So without spending too much time on that, which I'm sure many of you are already aware of, you've seen how over a period of time, since India offered itself to to GATS as a higher education as a commercial, tradable service, we found that successively the governments have been reducing their spending, which the Kothari Commission way back in 1986 had said that at least 6% of the GDP should be given to education. That was never implemented. And the recent government has been spending the lowest amount, the huge budgetary cuts, and they're now pushing us more and more in the direction of self-financing through HIFA loans, through other methods, by grading universities in different ways, and by through the NEP, which is going to be the final blow, which is going to put the final nail in the coffin of public funded higher education. As we have been seeing and talking about for the last few months, this NEP was brought in at the time of the pandemic without any discussion, and with knowing that the kind of resistance that we had been offering to some of these policies of downsizing faculty, of contractualization, of, degradation of the quality of education. We had huge thousands of people on the street. That is not possible during the pandemic. So let us do whatever we can do. So just like that, whether it was the farmers' laws or the labor laws or, the selling of all the assets, the demonetization came earlier and then the monetization during the pandemic. Why? Because we won't have, much resistance to it. We've already beaten the pillars of democracy into, submission, and then people are not allowed to come onto the streets. And not only in India, worldwide, there are all kinds of draconian laws against protest, against demonstrations, which are being passed. So in our own country, what we found is that this national education policy, the form that it is taking, the two basic aspects of it, one is the academic restructuring, where we are experiencing that in Delhi University today. One is the return of the most discredited four-year undergraduate program, which we had fought against 10 years ago. It's been brought back from next year without any discussion, in the middle of utter chaos, where there are 3 calendars for the 3 different years going on. Students are not learning a thing in these online classes. We'd never have more than 50% attendance. People are copying blindly in all their exams. And every parent in this country knows that this online education, online teaching is a farce. It doesn't work. Whether they can afford smartphones and laptops or connectivity or not, those who can afford it know that their children are sitting in front of screens and becoming zombies. And the second part of this is they've said they brought 3 regulations, which you might be aware of. One is the ABC regulation, which permits a student to take up to 70% of his coursework from other universities, meaning that you sit in one place and you do online courses from Bombay, Pune, Calcutta, Tamil Nadu, and only 30% needs to be done from the parent university. So what does this do to the quality of the education? What does it do to a degree? It will not be worth the paper on which it is written, as we all know. And this whole cafeteria approach that you pick up a gulab jamun, you pick up tomato sauce and eat it and you think you've got nutrition. You don't know how to construct your own curriculum. It's like a patient going to the chemist and saying, give me these medicines, I'll treat myself. Okay, so the quality goes. And the second thing that goes is livelihood. We have thousands of teachers who've been kept ad hoc for years. And in other universities, they may be on contract, they may be part-time. What happens to their workload? Are they going to be shown the door? Okay. Why would anyone then want to go in for higher education and research if it doesn't lead to a job? Okay. So you think you can replace this classroom teaching, the institutional relationship with the student, the relationship of students with other students who come from all over the country, the relationship of students and teachers. You can replace all of that with this, with a screen, with this online classes and a degree that you give at the end of it all, which is really, as I said, does not testify that you have actually learned anything at all. This is what is being done post-pandemic. That is, even if the pandemic goes or the lockdown goes and all of us are back to our classes, this is going to be made the permanent state of affairs, which the Prime Minister had once described on the 1st of May 2020, that online education is the heart and soul of the national education policy. And immediately after that, the amount of investment that the Ambanis and the Adanis and so on were doing in online education had gone and had a quantum leap, right? So we can see that this is geared towards online business. People have made millions in this through this online education business at a time of the pandemic when people have lost all sources of livelihood. People are starving. We have, gone down several indices in hunger. We are, so many from the middle class have been shifted down to below the poverty line. In this situation, there are those who have made their billions and who've gone into the top brackets of the richest in the world. So this is the way in which policies are being made in our country. The second part of NEP actually takes care that all unions will be destroyed, because you see the union is a stumbling block. In countries where the students and the teachers movement is strong, public education has survived, like in most of Europe. Okay. In Finland, it is 100% public funded. There is no private funding since the early 70s, when the country decided that this does not work. This Dory examination, the education system, this dual education system doesn't work. All right, so they have one only. Everybody sits together, and they have the best in the world. It is seen as the model that should be emulated everywhere else. But we are not following that. We're not looking at Germany. We're not looking at France. We're looking at the USA, which is a failed system, where there is trillions of dollar debt, of students' debt, and there is teachers, 80% teachers are adjunct and in and out of jobs. They form what they call the precariat. And the precariat is, always precarious. All right, you're worried about when your next meal is coming from. And I read a heartbreaking article which said the teachers were selling their plasma to make ends meet. That is the model there. And so this is what they're doing through the ABC regulation, which is not implemented in any university in any country. That you have such a huge component of your regular courses, that is 70%, being online, and that also from other universities. What quality control is there? The second regulation says that there is a MOOCs portal. MOOCs means massive open online courses. The word massive is important. Student-teacher ratio means nothing there. So they have prepared all these modules, and unfortunately, some of our permanent teachers have prepared those MOOCs because it was written in their promotion criteria. How many MOOCs have you prepared? So I told them, you make the axe, they'll cut you down with that same axe. All right. So you have those modules. And what they say is that every student, this is a regulation which applies to all universities, mind you, even to Rabindra Bharati University, all universities, that every student is free to opt for up to 40% of his courses from the MOOCs portal. If they do that, then what happens to our workload? What happens to the quality of education? Why will they need the teachers? So this is a ploy to cut down the faculty size by at least 50%, if not more. And as I was explaining earlier, and there's a third one which says, as if this was not enough, there's a third one which is called the blended learning regulation, which you might have been asked for a feedback on. DUTA has given its feedback, but they have not yet gazetted it. The other two are gazetted. One of them is already approved in the Delhi University EC, and other universities, I'm not aware of how many have approved it, the ABC regulation. But the blended learning regulation says that even the few courses that you teach, you will have to make about 40% of that course. Why this figure 40% again and again? I don't understand. 40% of that you will be making into pre-recorded lectures, which they will access. And the rest of the time you will be grading them and you will be correcting their assignments, as if that's all that teaching is about, right? As coaches or tutors will just, mark give you grades and marks, right? So this is their understanding, and it's clearly, it's not just a question of a failure of understanding. I don't think that there is an investment in the idea of quality at all. There is no investment in having, young men and women coming out of our universities who are able to think and question and hold their head high with the best universities in the world. The only thing that our half-educated children will be good for will be low-paid jobs in multinationals. You're preparing this labor, this what you call labor fodder, you might call it, for the world market. That's all you're doing, right? That's what they're calling Make in India. So you will not demand your decent wages. You will not demand bonuses. You will not want to know why there is inequality in the country and why these policies are the way they are. You will just do these, you'll either be an accountant or you'll be you're doing some very low-paid jobs for these multinationals, and they will be able to make a profit out of you. So this is what this is being geared towards, and we're not seeing large protests because there is this lockdown. You're not allowed to come together. You're not allowed to take class. Everything else is happening. Elections are happening. Festivals are happening. Malls are packed, but colleges and universities are empty. Why? So there seems to be a design in this. Get the teachers and the students used to this inertia. Students particularly, so that if they're given a choice, they will say MOOCs kar lete hain और number अच्छे आ जाएंगे वो भी में नकल करके. So this is basically the ploy that is being used. So these are the areas, unless people are empowered to express their dissent, neither will they have the ability, nor will they have the courage. All of us will be practicing self-censorship in this situation. The second part of NEP is actually saying that all affiliation system will end. All colleges will be autonomous. They will have their own management. The management will decide everything from A to Z, service conditions, student-teacher ratio, course contents, and the teachers do not have any representation in that board of governors, which will be 2/3 non-academic elements. 2/3 will be A, the representatives of corporate funders, B, representatives of government, and C, representatives of public-minded intellectuals. We know who they will be given the current dispensation. There is an India Intellectual Foundation and hundreds of other such organizations. Wahan se aayenge. They have a certain political ideology which they need to promote. So this is the marriage, the coming together of the corporate and the communal, which have found, very useful partners in each other, because you use communal hatred, polarization to brainwash people. If Germany could do it, so can India, right? To brainwash people and to make people fight with each other rather than question why they're not getting jobs, why they're not getting education, why are the prices so high, why can't we survive? So you're too busy fighting each other, and you're happy as long as your so-called enemy is being clobbered and you don't really care about what happens to you yourself. I mean, it's amazing, but that's the way things seem to be happening. So this is what is being done, whereas you really need to empower people, A, through education, B, through livelihood, C, through proper healthcare. We saw what happened to our healthcare during the second wave. I mean, it was absolutely devastating. The figures internationally, which are being talked about, is death of at least 50 lakhs, not 4 lakhs, as government figures are saying. So, and we saw it, we were in the middle of all of it. That should help us to learn a lesson that we need to strengthen public health. We need to strengthen public education rather than sell it to the highest bidder. Unfortunately, our government doesn't seem to learn the lesson. For them, the motto is, if you can pretend that everything is fine, if you have media houses which are captive and only talking about, Pakistan or Shah Rukh Khan or, Riya Chakravarti all the time engaging you in these things, then you can get away with murder. Literally, you can get away with murder. So I'd like to really end with a very personal note. This whole idea that dissent is a Western concept and it is not really part of Indian tradition, and people talk about ancient India, they will talk about the worst aspects of ancient Indian traditions, which we've had a lot to answer for. And they will not look at the positives. There are a lot of positives. And I would like to believe that all of us are products of that rich, diverse tradition. So on a very personal note, which I normally don't share, but I think we need to share these things with each other. Yeah, so part of my family, one side of my family comes from a humanist tradition. The Indian Humanist Union was founded by my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. The other part of my family is deeply religious. And they are all devotees of Anand Mahima. And I too am a devotee. And I have never found that there is any attempt to... There are many good and bad things in our religious traditions. We have to pick the good, which are in keeping with our humanity, our common sense. There is a tradition of questioning, of seeking, even there, ask questions. And there is the central theme of all our one, the force or that Shakti or the Lord resides in every single human being. So what is this demonization of the other that is going on? It is completely antithetical to that spiritual tradition, which had attracted seekers from all over the world. Now it is demonized and vulgarized that we feel ashamed of it, what is being touted as our religion. And then the influence of our schools. I was in a convent where the Jesuit tradition had a deep impact on me. We had something called the LTS, and we had Father Worth from Calcutta, we had Father De Mello from Delhi. And what they did was deconstruct every single thing. Why do you think the way you think? I mean, they were absolutely ruthless. Why do you want to believe in a God? All right, what is your reason? So, we were questioning everything. And I think that, and also the idea that there is no fence to sit on. If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. So I can completely understand from where Father Stan Swami is coming, because this is the kind of training that we also got in, some of our schools, and it had a deep impact on us. And then I got married to a Muslim, and there was absolutely no problem. My grandfather always wanted us to marry outside the community, but my religious side also was very happy, came to know the people concerned. And for my husband and I, religion is not a barrier. Both of us are believers, and that is the greatest bond. And that doesn't stop us from continuously questioning everything around us, including ourselves. And I'd like to end with, something that, in fact, I was exposed to through the humanist tradition, and that is Buddha's Kalamas Stotra, Sutta it's called. And that is, I mean, all of us would have heard about it, that, oh, Kalamas are the students, that be not led by tradition, by, the words of your teacher, by, I'm just paraphrasing, by the glamour of a philosophical view, even by your own reasoning, right? But by, thinking out things and thinking of that which will not harm, that which will be good, which will not cause unhappiness. If you read the whole thing, it's quite a long thing. So that is what should have been inspiring us. It is a treatise which helps us to continuously question ourselves as well as everything around us and move ahead in that manner. And right in the end, just one thing I'd like to say, we can remind ourselves of Martin Niemöller's, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one left to speak out. I mean, you've heard it so many times that we need to say it again and again. Like we need to say, Rabindra Thakur's poem again and again to ourselves. And we also need to tell ourselves that ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. All right, I'll end there. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Narain ji. I mean, I'm lacking in words, to be honest, to express my feeling at the moment. I mean, it was truly, already some comments have started coming, and I can see them. I can speak about myself. It was truly mesmerizing and illuminating, and I mean that. It was truly illuminating. Thank you for touching upon the very crucial issue of how state policies are being adopted to systematically crippling the whole education system, and how change of guard over decades has failed to bring about any, as you said, qualitative change in this process, or you indicated any qualitative change in this process of destroying the most important pillar of any democratic state, or any democracy for that matter. The other crucial issue that you have raised serious concern about is how farmers' issue is being mishandled by the government, or rather the governments, over time, over decades. And yes, we can't agree more with you that the less we speak about the so-called pillars of democracy, the better it would be. State missionaries have always played its tricks and exercised their quote-unquote right to using violence of different forms. That is quite expected. But this vulgar genuflection, or almost complete surrender of such forces of democracy before power, is absolutely uncalled for, unexpected. However, that clearly points towards the state of things that we all have been living with. Yes, something is definitely rotten in the state of Denmark, as stated by William Shakespeare. And this webinar was primarily meant to locate the root cause of this rot and find remedies for that. The webinar would be successful only if we can bring into effectiveness, we can actually bring into practice the ideas that we have harvested from these deliberations. I honestly thank Professor Narain once again for being a part of our webinar. And I request, yes, the last part, I was forgetting, the last part was also very, very interesting, because yesterday only Daya Disanaike ji from Sri Lanka, he was speaking about Buddhist socialism and the role of culture, religion, and values inherent in those cultures and systems, religious systems. How those values can be very, very effective if they are not mishandled or deliberately, used for political purposes. So it connects to what you said towards the end of your presentation. Is still, I can see Raj is still here. I think he would be interested to speak more, but I keep it open. I mean, for the participants, if anyone has any query or any comment for Narayan ji, they can express.